how significant is the economic relationship between the EU and the US, and how could Trump's tariffs disrupt that?
I'm delighted to join you today to discuss that crucial issue. And just a short disclaimer, so everything I say today is a reflection on my own personal interpretation of these fast-moving events, and they're moving very fast. And so it's difficult to discern what is really true behind, the propaganda. So I'm going to try to remain very focused and neutral and give you my personal interpretation. So first, to answer your question, yes, the commercial, trade, and investment, because both go together, right? Commerce and investment, cross-border, between Western Europe, because basically the European Union is essentially Western Europe, let's face it. 95% of the EU, when we speak of the EU, is 5 or 6 Western European countries, right? So that commercial trade relation with America is crucial, critical, is vital. But it's not equal. What do I mean by that? I mean by that Europe, Western Europe, needs America, needs American customers, their companies, French, German, Italian companies, they need American clients more than the other way around. So more than America needs to sell its products in Western Europe. So that's one first imbalance. A second imbalance, which is very important.
Now, you mean here, let me just get straight here. So you mean here that exports to Europe from the United States is more than that of the European Union to the United States. This is correct?
Exactly. Okay. It's one way.
Please continue.
It's one way to view it. Another way, another additional way to view it, but you're right, but there's another factor additionally, is replacement. So for example, let's say that German, Italian, French companies, when they can no longer export to America, is there a potential substitution? So can they quickly and easily find other buyers for their products? And the answer is no. So the answer is no, clearly. Why is it no? And because look at what kind of products are being exported from Europe to America. Essentially, these are expensive cars, expensive industrial machine tools, and expensive consumer products and foods. So that would be, famous, world famous French brands like Louis Vuitton, Moet Hennessy, Gucci in Italy, Mercedes-Benz, BMW. So for all these companies, America is a vital market, and it's their biggest client, to be honest.
Right, but you did not answer the question of will these tariffs disrupt relations? Now I'll get back to you again, but let me here go to Mr. Zanadou. And from your point of view, how can China ensure the retaliatory tariffs effectively target industries that will pressure the U.S. government to reconsider its trade policies?
I think China should concentrate its effort in the swing state. For example, the agriculture business in those West states like Wisconsin, Ohio, and Michigan, and so on. And China also try to lobby the key industries that hold a large market share in China, such as the Boeing aero industry groups. Furthermore, the U.S. generic pharmaceutical industry also use almost 78% of the raw ingredients from China. So China can also impose restrictions on those. Just happened 5 hours export controls. Many of these companies focusing on the semiconductor industry as well as AI. So, thank you.
Right. Mr. Fazeli, again, how might a 10% universal tariff affect the Eurozone's GDP growth? And we're not just speaking about the 10%, but rather more to other European countries. And again, let me reiterate the question. How will that reflect on the economic relationship or disrupt the relationship, the economic relationship between the United States and the EU?
The disruption will be slow. And why will it be slow? Just a quick comment which will allow our viewers to understand. A colleague in China is absolutely right. China will focus on the Corn Belt and the Rust Belt when they retaliate. But he mentioned Boeing, like the big airliners, and it's the same issue in Europe. It's linked to Europe. It's an oligopoly. Basically, you have two companies in the world that can produce big civilian airplanes. Only two, Airbus in Europe and Boeing in Seattle in America. And the order book to get an airplane, if you're Chinese or whatever French, you need to order 2 years in advance, right? So, and the order book of Airbus is already full for the next 2-3 years. So if a Chinese customer wants to punish Boeing and he cancel his order to Boeing and he wants to order more planes from Airbus in Europe, it's not that easy. It's very complicated. Back to your question, yes, it's bad because it's not only 10%, it's 10% tariffs on UK products, but on most European Union, it's 20%, at least 20%, and it could be in the coming weeks more than 20% if the trade war gets worse, and I think it will get worse in the short term. So I think we could see 25-30% slapped aggressively on a lot of European Union products, much more than the UK, much more than England. And I think Europe has very few options. So the situation is going to get bad, I think. But in that game, tit for tat, al-ayn dil-ayn, in that cruel tit for tat game, which will escalate in the coming weeks, Europe is not well equipped to fight America in a full-fledged trade war. China is better equipped. So if there is a burgeoning, escalating trade war, even though the Chinese economy has issues of its own, culturally, industrially, the Chinese government is better equipped if they want to enter a full-fledged trade war. For Europe, it would be suicidal.
Mrs. Zanadu, what do you have here to what Mr. Fazeli said so far, and how can China leverage its control over critical resources like the rare earth minerals to strengthen its bargaining position?
China will also adopt the classical, let's say, the export control and the restrictions. These are the classic tools U.S. has been using for a long time. Particularly, China want to protect its lithium and the cobalt, industry, cut off the trade with U.S.-related companies in this critical resources area. Also, China would sanction the U.S. mining firms by denying the access to the Chinese processing technologies. As we know to this date, a large percentage of these tools, the mineral processing tools, are developed in China. So this is the key issue.
So what's exactly your take on or comment on Mr. Fazeli's and what do you think China's next move would be?
I think China would just, applying these classical tools like U.S. has been used in the past. Basically, we are creating a different trade blocks right now. So we are entering not just the Cold War, but the trade Cold War. Now this is basically the situation where U.S. has become the enemy of many different countries.
Mr. Fazeli, could retaliatory tariffs from Europe escalate into a broader trade war, and what would be the consequences then?
Yes, sadly, I think in the short, medium term, the situation is going to get worse. It's going to get much worse in the next 6, 7, 8 weeks before hopefully people come back to their senses and reach a middle of the road solution, a compromise with America. And to be honest, once again, mentally, ideologically, politically, China is better structured to bite the bullet and, survive the trade war with America and thrive later on. Europe, because of the way it's organized, so we call it structural reasons, it's going to be much more difficult. One more fact is the White House is going to play them one against the other. So that beautiful united European front will not last more than 10 days or 2 weeks. Very easily, Washington will pick them apart. So already the Italians, the Romanians, the Greeks, the Hungarians, and the British,
And the Germans.
and the Germans also to a lesser extent, are sending signals of their own to Washington saying, oh no, please don't hurt us, we will compromise. So it's only, only a handful of ideologues in Brussels and Paris and Lithuania who want, or Denmark or whatever, they want the hard line against Washington. But these people, France, Denmark, Estonia, Lithuania alone, they cannot hold that pan-European hard line. We cannot go to war if you're a general, if half your soldiers are pacifists. And this is exactly the problem that the European Commission faces. Ursula von der Leyen, Emmanuel Macron, they're talking a tough talk. They're saying, oh, and we will retaliate even more by impeding or barring German and French industrial companies from any investment in any plant or factory in America. Of course they will not. Of course they cannot. And so it shows you the limitation of that sort of EU Commission, macho talk, but they don't have the economic and industrial means to enter a full-fledged trade war with America.
Mrs. Xanadu, how or can China collaborate with other WTO members to challenge the legality of the US tariffs and strengthen the multilateral trade frameworks, particularly that those new tariffs are or goes against some of the World Trade Agreements?
I think China needs to start and to create more of its own alliances of the trade diplomacy. I think China must try to be a leader in this global level trade war right now, working with other BRIC states, for example, India, Brazil, and Russia, those major states, also with the European Union, of course, to back China up and to create a more regional economic partnership outside the WTO structure, and working more on the country-to-country bilateral trade agreements. Then again, we can also file the WTO complaints and dispute based on the violation of the most favored nations. Now, that's the Article 1 of the GATT, as we know. This is indeed a time for China to gather its strength and to use this American-led mistake as the point for reorganizing the global order.
Mr. Fazeli, why do you think Germany particularly is exposed to the risks of Trump's tariffs compared to other EU nations?
One word: industry. Because other EU nations, they have deindustrialized, right? So when America says, okay, I'm going to no longer import quality cars or, big industrial machine tools, where it's really sad, because of the industrial decline, the steep industrial decline of Italy and France in the past 15, 20 years, the French and the German no longer manufacture advanced industrial machine tools, and they don't have that many quality middle market or upper middle market luxury cars to export. They will be hurt differently. So the Italians and the French will be hurt via luxury clothing, cheese, wine, food. But if you look at big item industrial products, Germany stands a lot to lose. Timing is everything in war and peace. And so Trump has declared a trade war on Europe precisely when the European economy was already in decline. So before even Trump entered the White House 3 months ago, the economic data coming from German manufacturers were already mediocre or bad. So if you hit someone, a rival, when he is weak already, well, you increase the chances of hurting him. And there's one quick comment I'd like to make on my Chinese expert. Very brilliantly, he mentioned BRICS, yes. And that says a lot, because look at what President Trump and the White House did 2 days ago. In relative terms, when Trump, started that, global trade realignment, Brazil, Russia, and South Africa were treated quite well. And it was a big surprise because, Canada, Europe, Germany were treated very harshly, but Brazil, Russia, and South Africa were treated quite well, even though they are BRICS, even though they have strong ties to China, and even though the ruling parties in Brazil and South Africa are openly socialist, they criticize Trump, they say he's a right-winger, blah, blah, blah. They are progressive policymakers. All that factored in, still, Trump decided to treat Brazil, Russia, and South Africa very well. That says a lot. It means that in his mind, the real rivalry, the big picture, is the technological military rivalry with China. And he wants to buy, quote unquote, the neutrality of Brazil, Russia, and South Africa in that rivalry with China. He doesn't care about Europe's neutrality, and that says a lot. And also South Africa, Russia, and Brazil have a lot of gold, they have a lot of platinum, and they are the only countries where he can buy rare earth minerals at the time when China will limit the export of rare earth minerals to America. So all that is fierce, cruel perhaps, aggressive perhaps, but very well calculated.
Mr. Xanadu, from that perspective, the industrial perspective and otherwise, can we say that China can form a kind of alliances with European countries to present a united front against the US trade policies?
Yes, I would say, China and Europe should definitely work together. As I always say, it is not a coincidence. Europe and China shares no ocean apart. We are on the basically same continent. And for example, the Chinese European Railway is a venue for both the China and the European nations can utilize to strengthen its trade cooperation and also cutting down the logistic costs, of course. And also China and the EU should think to create some kind of alternative supply chain to surpass the US control. I mean, this is also a crucial time for the European Union to show its strategic autonomy, as the US has even betrayed, the traditional transatlantic partnerships. And for those, let's say, pro-US factions of the EU leadership should be also aware in the US, the realpolitik is the priority rather than the proclamation of the so-called, liberal international order. This is all lie.
Right. Mr. Fazeli, finally here, could these tariffs lead to a prolonged trade war? And what would be the implications for the global markets?
That's a very difficult question, and I'll start by making a quick comment. Once again, I agreed with a lot of what my Chinese colleague said, but now I'm going to disagree with him on one point, essentially. I think the Chinese leadership believes in realpolitik. So ironically, by a cruel irony, the Chinese leaders, they share a lot of ideological worldview with America. They're realists. They're cold-blooded, ultra-rational realists. Trump is a neo-realist. He's abandoning, the free trade, open borders, neoliberal order of the past 40 years. The Brits and the Europeans are clinging desperately to that neoliberal order, which is dying. But the Chinese were ahead of Trump. The Chinese are old school realists. Now to your question, I think in the short, medium term, the trade war between America...
Before I go to this, Mr. Chu, Mr. Xanadu, do you have here a comment on Mr. Fazeli?
Yes, I think, all the major countries are practicing realpolitik. Of course, some has better decorations outside to show, for example, they are neoliberal. But for the domestic politics in China, definitely we are not liberal. But maybe for the sake of international trade and for the global influence, China is also adopting the neoliberal order because, the Chinese elite, many of the Chinese elite are educated in the US system, unfortunately. So you are right. I agree with him.
Right, Mr. Fazeli, please continue.
So once again, I'm in full agreement now with my Chinese colleague. I think in the short, medium term, what do I mean by that? I mean, 3, 4, 5 months, it's going to get worse, much worse. There will be blood. So I think, the crisis is going to spiral. Many factories will close in Europe.
Yeah.
Why am I pessimistic? Because I think the industrial slowdown of Europe had started anyway.
Briefly, yes, please, briefly, Mr. Fazeli, because we're running out of time.
And after a while, there will be a kind of a settlement. So to survive, the European Union will need to find a compromise. So I think they will make a compromise to Trump.
Right, that is very clear. That was Mr. Meher Nicholas Fazeli, Executive Director of European Asian Center, and Mr. Linji Cho Zanadu, an international relations specialist and global publicist. We thank you so much for your insights.